Hello and welcome. Today I've got part 2 of my collab with Altenew to share with you. I've got more floral goodness on the way, but this time featuring a Craft-A Flower die set. So these are the products that I'll be using today. So I'm using the Craft-A Flower Sulfur Cosmos die set. And this is my first time using a Craft-A Flower die set, and I'm really excited to use it, and I'm really happy with what resulted from it. I'm also using the Illusion Diamonds stamp. I picked this up myself. It's been in my stash, and I'm going to use that as a background. And I'm going to cut a panel of white cardstock using the Essential Arches from Ellen Hudson to frame my whole card and flowers on. And I was also thinking about using some Distress Glaze in Lost Shadow today. So the cool thing about Altenew's packaging and what I really like is that they give you a lot of inspiration for products. Just for this Illusion stamp set, they give you a lot of ways that you can use it, and they even include a little coloring section and some products that work well with it. So I just wanted to make note of that because I thought that's really neat. And so I've got a piece of cardstock that I cut in half. So it's, what are the dimensions? 5.5 by, I don't know, it's half a sheet of paper, just so that I have a little bit of extra room to stamp on so I can emboss and have a place to grab the edges since this is such a large stamp. That way I don't get my fingers in any embossing ink or in any powder. So I've got that stamp in my Misty and I'm priming it since it's the first time that I've used it. And I'm going to hit that paper with some anti-static powder just so that I don't get some powder in places I don't want it. And then I'm gonna use my Versamark here and get this guy loaded up. And I do have to press a bit harder and use a bit more ink than I normally would because my ink pad is a bit dry. So yeah, I gotta get a re-inker for that. And so I'm stamping that down and using my Pink Fresh pressure tool. The nice thing about this stamp is you can kind of see where I didn't get pressure, and so that allowed me to focus my little pressure tool in that area to get some good contact. And it looks like I've got a pretty good result there, so I'm powdering it up with that Lost Shadow embossing glaze. This is my first time using this. It's really cool. I like the shine and the color that you get. I like that you can match colors with your oxides or your inks. I think that's pretty neat. So I'm getting that coated and I'm melting that powder. It took me such a long time to melt the powder since this is such an intricate background stamp. But here you can kind of see it. It's not picking up great on the camera, but there's a bit of shine and color to this, which is really nice. And yeah, I was just pointing out here that the spots that were missed is likely because of my ink pad being dry. But it's okay because we'll end up covering that up anyway. So I pulled out the Essential Arches die set here from Ellen Hudson, and I am picking the arch that I think I would like. And the cool thing about this die set is it's kind of like a 3-piece. You get the arch that cuts out on the inner portion there, you get a little frame, and then you have the exterior portion of the arch. So that's like your negative space when you die cut. So I'm just trying to figure out what size I want here that makes the most sense for what I'm doing, because I'm planning to build my florals in the bottom left corner. So I want some of that visual interest here, but I also want something that isn't too large of an arch since I will be using that corner. So here's that die set, and I love that they make it so easy to assemble the two flowers because one of the dies, they have arrows, which is for your smaller flower in this case, and then they have the keyhole, which is for your larger flower. And that's how you know which parts go to what, as well as the fact that there are numbers on the dies. And so here I'm getting an idea of what color I wanted to use. I was feeling pink. I've been on a little bit of a pink kick, which for me is a little bit rare. So I die cut my white panel out of scrap paper just to get an idea of how things are going to look with scale and with color. And here you can see that frame and that inner arch piece. And so at this point, I decided on carnation and ballet slipper cardstocks. They just felt like the right tone and color here because I didn't want something too punchy and dark. So yeah, and I'm deciding to cut the smaller flower out of ballet slipper and the larger flower out of carnation. So for the flower centers, I was originally leaning more so with Stardust, but as you'll see later, I do end up switching to honeycomb. And then I decided to pick out the color for my greenery, which I decided on avocado because it looked really good with both of the pinks. So that was an easy decision. So I'm running both the small flower through my die cut machine. And then and here you can kind of see that the little number that is kind of etched into the die there. A little number, I think that's a number 1, maybe not. But yeah, I think that's a number 3. But it's pretty cool how they have that. So it's really easy to assemble these flowers. Like you don't have to pay attention other than making sure you don't get glue everywhere. And so I'm die cutting my flower centers and my greenery. I'm running that through. And then now I'm going to start assembling. And I do love that Altenew has the layering guide on the back of the packaging in case you need something to reference if you are a little bit confused or you just need to figure out how things go if it's not quite clear. But luckily with those keyholes, it makes things super, super easy. So I'm mainly concentrating my glue around the keyhole so that I have the ability to move some petals around if I want to, and just not to cover too much with glue. So there you can see, you just line things up with that keyhole. You should be able to see through it. And then I'm just going to keep building this flower up. And I really do like this die set. I think it's really genius how they design it and how easy it is to make complex flowers like this because it looks like it takes a lot more work than it is, but it turns out beautifully. It's super easy and I cannot, speak well of it enough. So I'm just assembling that. And at this point, you see this little petal here. There's a number on it, the number 5. That's where the small little folded petal sits. So you just got to glue that down there. There is another piece similar to this on the smaller flower as well, but things are very clearly marked. So it's not too confusing to assemble. So now I'm going to glue down that flower center. And again, this piece, you just line up with the keyhole. That allows you to place the flower center. And then the top piece closes up that keyhole. So you never knew it was there. And it comes together very seamlessly, very flawlessly. And it makes such a beautiful flower. All right, now with that guy done, I'm going to assemble the second flower in the same way. Just focusing the glue around the arrow and just building things up. Have you tried any of these Craft-A Flower die sets? Now that I've tried this one, I kind of want to try a lot more of them. I enjoyed it. They're fun. They make such a beautiful flower. And yeah, I just want to keep going. So if you see some in the near future, I got hooked. And as you see, this flower also has those numbers on it, so you know what layer to glue down next and what layer you have. And here is that piece that has that special little petal. So I'm gluing that down, and then I'm just going to pop that petal on there. And I love how they design these flowers with these little kind of extras or features because it really helps to make them look real. It looks like it's really the fold of that petal, like it's folding up and, pointing towards the inside of the flower. So I love the attention to detail on this set, and I'm sure all the other sets as well. Now I want a Craft-A Flower die set in every single type of flower ever imaginable. I would love a ranunculus. Those are one of my favorite flowers. I love all the layers and the depth of them. And lisianthuses. Those are some of my favorites as well, and they are beautiful if you haven't seen them. They kind of look like roses. They're very similar to roses, but they're beautiful. And here are those two flowers. Not too bad. And they come together so quickly. Okay, so now I'm trying to get a ballpark of how I want to arrange things here. Like I said before, I'm a very visual person, so before I even think about gluing stuff, I have to fuss with layouts, or else I likely will regret it and change my mind, and it's not worth it to start over all the time. So I'm just tucking the greenery around, really figuring out what I want to do, and playing with those flowers. And I love that you can, orient them however you would like. Just flip them around, make them point different directions. The sky is the limit with these die sets for how you can use them and really what projects to use them on. So I pulled out the Versatile Greetings die set and the Sentiment Strips 2 stamp set because this is what I was going to build my sentiment out of. So I was thinking about the Hello die, and then I was thinking about the For My Fabulous Friend sub-sentiment, but masking off the for and just making it My Fabulous Friend. And I was going to tuck it underneath that word die. And at this point, I decided that a smaller arch was necessary. It seemed like I had too much open space. In this way, I could assemble into the corner more. And I also decided to change my mind on the background. So I stamped and heat embossed the background stamp again, but this time using Gilded Embossing Powder from Brutus Monroe. I love this touch of gold. I think it felt more right than the Lost Shadow embossing glaze. And at this point, I was also second guessing my flowers a bit because they were feeling a little bit too flat. There wasn't enough differentiation between the different petals. And so at first I thought maybe I could save this by zhuzhing the petals. And the zhuzhing, it really does make a difference. It's really pretty. I love what it does. But in the end, I decided to start over a bit. But as you see, it really does add to these flowers, having that little bit of lift to them. And I was just trying to figure out if this would be the winner here, tucking things in. But in the end, it just wasn't sitting right. It wasn't, making me too happy. So I decided that I would pull out my grip mat here, and I'm using the A2 sized one, and I'm sticking it on my glass mat because I'm going to add a bit of shading and ink blending to these petals. And so I probably should have recorded this when I was actually doing it so that you can hear my explanation in real time. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to break these flowers into 3 levels because you will have your darkest point, so your most shaded petals, and then you'll have your midtones where your petals are a little bit dark, not as dark as the back petals, but they still have some shading and shadow, and then you'll have your highlighted petals, which is, they're going to get the most light, they're going to be the brightest. So I've decided that the back petal here for this flower is going to be my darkest petal, which makes sense because less light is getting to that. So that very first petal there, I'm going to ink blend on to make it darker. And the nice thing too with this layering guide is it can also help you pinpoint which layers would be your darkest point, your midtone, and your highlight. So it's another great thing to refer to if you're having a hard time figuring out what petals you're trying to add ink to and how you're trying to blend on them. So that's always a good thing to have near you when doing this. And so I wanted to do a little bit of a darker ink here. So I decided to blend Carnation ink onto the Ballet Slipper cardstock and then Sweet Pea onto the Carnation cardstock. So here, like I said, I've got the Carnation ink and I'm blending a bit heavy-handed. It's not perfect blending. It doesn't have to be onto this back petal because I'm just trying to make it look dark. I need to create enough darkness to differentiate this layer between my next layer, which will be my mid-tone. So here, as you can see, there's already enough differentiation between the petals without ink blending on that second layer yet. So I'm just going to add a little bit more ink to this guy, for this back petal. And then I'm going to put that to the side, and this is my mid-tone. And so I'm trying to kind of pick out the petals here on the flower there, just so you can kind of see where they are and how they sit. But we have this little short petal that's kind of facing toward us, and then the other petals that are facing the opposite direction. So that short petal with it facing towards us, I'm going to blend it a little bit differently, a little bit lighter, since there's a little bit of light hitting it, or theoretically there would be. So I'm just taking my ink blending here kind of gently around the edges of the petal, not coming in as heavy as the last time. And as I said, I am trying to be a little bit more light-handed with that shorter petal there. And so I'm just blending that ink on just to get a little bit of differentiation. And I'm not an expert in shading or, you know, any of that detailed type of art. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. I, you know, by no means am an expert. But here, as you can see, there is differentiation. The petals do look different. And then if I bring in the plain cardstock, you know, they all look different. So you can tell, you know, you have some petals that are further back, some that are closer, and some that are the closest. So here, I'm picking out the front petals. And like I said, those are going to be your lightest. Wherever the light is coming from, we're assuming it's just coming kind of top down at it. It's going to be shining all over that petal. So I'm blending into the center of it, because you're going to get that depth from the flower center here. You're not going to be getting any shadow in any other way. It would just be hitting that flower center and casting a little bit of a shadow around the side of it. So I'm blending on those two pieces there, trying to make the one that has that little funky extra petal there a little bit darker. And then I'm going to blend on the last little petal here. And so here with this little curled over petal piece, I'm going to add a little bit of shading to that area so it looks like that petal is curling over and casting a little bit of a shadow onto it. And here I'm going to get an idea of how my flower is looking. I'm just going to, you know, loosely stack things together to make sure I like it before gluing everything down. And so I'm liking how it's looking. It's looking pretty good. There's enough differentiation between layers and petals that I decided to glue everything together. Here are all the petals together on it, and you can really see the different layers in the different petals. And so at this point, I decided to do the same thing with the flower centers. So these are cut out of honeycomb cardstock. And I'm going to blend on some Stardust ink, so that way it's a shade one step lighter. I'm really taking advantage of the buddy system here to add a bit of dimension so that it's not just tone on tone and subtle. It'll be a little bit more noticeable. So I'm just working that ink around the outer edge of the flower center here, or at least trying my best to. Just so that way the middle of the flower center will hopefully be a little bit lighter, so there's a little bit of a difference, but if not, that's okay. But as you can see, there is a difference between the ink blended part and the flower center. So now we're going to work on the larger flower here. And again, I'm just trying to figure out which petals are my furthest back and will be my darkest, which will be my mid-tone, and which will be my highlight. So for this flower, we have this funky little single petal, and then we have this 3-piece petal. These two are the furthest back. And then again, the layering guide will also help with this as well. You can kind of break things down easier. So I'm taking that Sweet Pea ink and I'm blending it fairly heavy-handed on these petals here, because we really need a very obvious differentiation between shades. And so comparing that, it's looking good. This is my mid-tone petal. And so I'm again trying to point it out here. There's the 3 petals. And I do wish I would have blended this guy a little bit differently. I kind of went about it. I didn't follow exactly what I did for the last flower. This one I decided just to kind of work from the center up. And I kind of wish I would have done the outer edges of the petals in like the ballet slipper flower. But overall, it's not bad. I'm still happy with how this flower turned out. And so I'm just layering things up here again to make sure that there's enough of a differentiation, a difference in the petals, so that it doesn't look like it's just one ball, too similar. And so there's enough between the midtone and the highlight, but my furthest back petals, so I'm just adding a little bit more ink to the midtone, just trying to bring it up a bit. And then I am adding a bit more ink, a little bit heavier to my furthest back petals, just so that there's much more of a noticeable difference. And so next up are my last couple pieces here, the lightest portions of the flower. And so I'm not going to be blending on that tiny little die cut there. I'm going to leave that alone since the light will be hitting that directly. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the last one, and I'm going to focus my ink here into the middle of the flower, or the middle of the petals. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of ink where that petal hangs over, so it acts like a shadow. And that's how that would look. And then I am cleaning my grip mat here because it has its inaugural staining. I've avoided using any ink colors that would stain it for a bit just because I didn't want to get it stained right away. But even if it's stained, it's perfectly fine. So I have that flower all glued down, and I'm going to add the flower centers here. They're looking good. They're looking pretty. I'm happy with how they are. It's wild how different these flowers look compared to my first ones. Like, that ink blending really, really packs a punch. So I love how they're looking. And so I pulled out my greenery because I thought, okay, we're going to get this card going. We're going to get it assembled. It's going to be done in no time. But I decided that there needs to be some ink blending on the stems as well, because they just look a little too flat compared to the flowers. So I've got those stuck on my grip mat, and just like with the flowers, I'm going to go one step up in the bunny system just so that the ink blending is a bit more impactful. So I'm using artichoke ink here on the avocado cardstock, and I'm just mainly focusing my ink blending in the middle of the stem. This way, the stems are pretty dark and there's a little bit of ink that will kind of diffuse into the leaves here. But I like how this is looking. I like the little bit of detail that this adds, and I think this pairs really well with how the flowers are looking. All right, so now we are to the point of beginning assembly, and I wanted this arched panel to have a bit of dimension to it, so I just pulled out some foam tape that I had sitting around, and it's not super, super lofty. I kind of wish I had a little bit more dimension to it, but it'll do just fine. So I'm pulling out my score buddy here, and I'm lining up my two panels in it, or at least my background panel, and then I'm going to pull off the foam backers on the arched panel, dot some glue over it for some wiggle room just in case I need it. And I picked this tip up from Kathy Z on lining things up in your score buddy like this. It's super easy to do. This is how I make my shaker cards. But everything is lined up super easily into that corner. You don't have to fuss with things possibly getting unaligned and all that. Super easy. And so now I'm kind of fussing with my arrangement again because I did add an extra greenery stem to this with the 4. I started off with the 3 and I added a 4th so things would feel a little bit more lush, a little bit more balanced. And I'm liking how things are looking, so I'm pulling out the Featured Sentiments dies as well as that stamp set again. And I'm figuring out which die works with that sentiment. At the time, I was thinking about using the For My Fabulous Friend and just kind of masking part of it off. But at this point, I didn't like how this sentiment was going to be this large. I wanted it to be maybe a little bit more to scale with the hello. So I was starting to change my mind on what I wanted. I ended up settling on the I Just Adore You sentiment because it does have a smaller coordinating die to it. And see, there you can see I was lining it up and I was like, okay, like we have a smaller die to use. This is great. And so I figured out which die that would be and I popped it off just to make sure that I liked how that would look. And so I die cut the hello out of Concord and Ninth white for the shadow and the Simon Says Stamp glossy black for the hello. And I heat embossed the I Just Adore You on black cardstock using alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. I die cut some extra layers under the hello and I die cut out that sentiment strip and I built everything up. So again, I'm just figuring out how I like things, and since I'm happy with it, I'm starting to tack down my leaves. This is the way that I typically create when I'm doing stuff like this because I know if I move it, I'm not going to get it laid out exactly how I liked it. So the easiest way for me to do this is just to sneak the tip of my glue bottle underneath everything and tack it in place. And with things mostly tacked down, I pulled those flowers off so I could glue things down a bit more, get it more secured. And I decided to put little bits of foam tape underneath some of the larger leaves that were hanging over into that arched area that really needed a little bit of extra support. So I'm just sneaking some foam tape behind there and just making sure that that's nice and secured. And then again, finishing off tacking down the leaves in the spots that were hidden underneath the flowers. So I have my flowers, again, laid out how I like, and because I don't want things moving around because I'm paranoid and a perfectionist like that, I ended up just taping part of that flower down, just with some mint tape from scrapbook.com. And then I put some glue on the back of my light pink smaller flower there, and I'm just sticking that down. Luckily there's enough space on the card front that it doesn't need foam, but this pink flower on the other hand does need a little bit, so I was sneaking some back behind there, just figuring out where it needed that support. And then once I got those two spots figured out, I again snuck my glue glue tip underneath that flower and squeeze some glue in so that it would stick down. And then I can move that I can move that mint tape really easily and get everything else stuck down. And I'm gluing my hello down on the arch. And I did decide just on glue because there is a bit of loft to the hello. But I am using some foam tape on the little sentiment strip there just so that it's even with the white panel. So I'm pulling off those backers and I'm going to add some glue to the foam as well as to the portion that doesn't have foam since that'll be resting on the white cardstock. And at this point I decided this card really needed some shine to finish it off. So after a lot of fussing with some dewdrops and going back and forth on sequins, I decided on this arrangement. I feel like it makes things feel pretty balanced. I don't know, I'm happy with it. So I'm gluing that arrangement down since I'm pretty thrilled with it. And sorry about my head getting in the way again here. I'm still adjusting to my film setup again now that I'm back down in my craft room. But that finishes off today's card. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think the flowers are absolutely beautiful. I am in love with the ink blending on that. And I love the little kind of subtle shine that the dewdrops add here, the shine of the background, and that sentiment. I think it's perfect, it's classy, and it really rounds things out well. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a like, subscribe if you want to follow along, and I will catch you next time.